Iran and U.S. are in a race to locate a missing crew member of a U.S. fighter jet that went down inside Iran. And Iran says it has shot down at least 2 U.S. fighter jets in the region, with the second one crashing in the Persian Gulf. Now, here's what we know so far. Iran says it shot down the F-15 warplane with at least 2 crew members, the first American aviators shot down over enemy territory since 2003. U.S. media later reported that American forces rescued one of the 2 crew members. Iran has declared a reward for capturing the crew member alive.
Please pay attention. Dear viewers, please pay attention. Residents of Kogiluya and Boya Ahmad province, dear and courageous people, if you capture and hand over a pilot or pilots of the enemy alive to the law enforcement and military forces, you will receive a valuable reward and prize.
Iran's military also said it downed a U.S. A-10 ground attack aircraft in the Gulf, with U.S. media saying the pilot was rescued. Iranian state media also released a video claiming that it showed Iranian air defense downing the American A-10 aircraft. Now, the veracity of the video could not be confirmed. U.S. officials told Reuters that 2 Black Hawk helicopters involved in the search effort for the F-15 jet were hit by Iranian fire but made it out of Iranian airspace. Iranian state broadcaster Egypt shared a claim saying it was a black day for U.S. aviations. It listed the alleged losses and hits, including the F-15E jet, the 2 Black Hawk helicopters, and it said that the 2 A-10 aircraft were also hit, with one crashing in the Persian Gulf and the other making an emergency landing. It claimed 2 emergencies for American aircraft, one for an F-16 over Iraq and another for a KC-135 over Israel. Now, the F-15 Eagle is first U.S. plane to go down in Iranian territory in 5 weeks of this war. It is a twin-engine, all-weather tactical fighter with a range of about 5,000 kilometers. It is known for its undefeated air-to-air combat record. Now, each unit costs nearly 90 to 94 million U.S. dollars. The U.S. military has announced the loss of several aircraft during Iran operations, including 1 tanker that crashed in Iraq and 3 F-15 jets shot down by Kuwaiti friendly fire. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has said that the president has been briefed about the incident, and reports say that President Trump canceled all press conferences after convening national security team. And hours later, President Donald Trump told NBC that the F-15 loss would not affect negotiations with Iran. And here, I'm quoting him here, he said, "No, not at all. No, it's war." All right, to discuss more, we're now being joined by Colonel David Beatis-Roches. He's a professor at the Thayer Marshall Institute and former deputy director for peacekeeping in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast, Colonel. Now, there are reports of this F-15E Strike Eagle and a 10C Thunderbolt II being crashed in Iran. Pentagon has not reacted. If you could tell us and make us understand how important that these jets are at this point of time, and what does it mean for the U.S. arsenal at this moment?
Yeah. So first off, whenever there's a person that is isolated, so a service member who is in a position behind enemy lines or whatever, usually they're not. There's no comment from the military until that person is recovered. So that's not unusual. So the F-15 is a 1980s model aircraft that has been updated repeatedly. It is originally designed as just an air-to-air fighter. It's been modified over the years to also perform an air-to-ground function. It was due to be replaced by now, but the replacement, the F-22, had some issues and was very expensive, so they decided instead to extend the service life of it. Typically, you would expect one major incident with an F-15 for every 5,000 operating hours. So, actually, if you look at this like an actuary, where you assess risk, it's a little remarkable that we haven't lost one to enemy fire in the length of the campaign. The loss of the aircraft is somewhat significant, but the big issue is, of course, the missing crew member, and you can see the level of effort that's been directed towards it. The A-10 Thunderbolt is a dedicated, on the other hand, it's a dedicated ground attack aircraft. It was designed originally to kill tanks in Central Europe if the Soviet Union invaded NATO. The Air Force has never really liked having this mission or this aircraft, and they've been trying to phase it out for years. It's due to be phased out at the end of next year. It flies very, very slowly, and basically is really only suitable for hitting targets on the ground. But it's a wonderful, wonderful aircraft for that. It's like the infantryman's best friend. So the fact that it was hit, given that it flies so slowly and so close to the ground, is not surprising. But if the aircraft was unable to make it back, that means that it was probably hit by a missile. Typically, there are instances of these planes absorbing literally hundreds of bullet holes and still making it back to base.
That's interesting. And we also have reports where Iran, of course, has shared claims that they also had attacked the Black Hawk helicopters. Of course, it hit and it made it out. And you have also U.S. officials who have confirmed this. Of course, as you mentioned, if it was for the search of this particular soldiers that's left, how big of a loss or, risk is U.S. taking at this point when, now they have a U.S. soldier which is at risk of course, being captured in there in Iran?
Yeah, so when you have a downed air crew, that is a very, very big deal. And so the A-10, the Blackhawks, and that's the HH variant, which is a lot more expensive, and it's designed specifically for long-range penetration, and it has a lot of equipment that the standard Blackhawk doesn't have on it. Those are very, very low density assets, so they're usually only used for the most important missions, and down pilot recovery is one of those. So one pilot has been recovered, the other is not. That's definitely a priority, and I think that the ethos of the U.S. Air Force and really the whole military is this is something they don't want to see. So you're seeing a level of risk that is beyond what commanders would authorize for normal ground attack. This is a very significant issue, and people are willing to assume more risks than they would if they were just bombing another target in Iran.
And this all happening where Trump, of course, he had addressed earlier, stating that the conflict will drag on for another 2 to 3 weeks, in which Iran could be hit pretty hard and taken to the Stone Ages. And this, of course, this downing of a jet comes right after that happened. And then when we look at Trump's reaction, he says that this will not hinder the talks, negotiations with Iran. And he's not ready to say what Washington will do if the missing American airman is harmed. How do you assess this remarks from Trump coming in at this point?
Well, smart analysts in the United States, they say that Trump's enemies take him literally but not seriously, and his supporters take him seriously but not literally. I think that President Trump, of course, when you have such a big air campaign, there's always a chance of down fighters, and so I don't think it's necessarily unexpected, and the fact that one of the fighters has already been recovered shows that there were contingencies in place for this. Hopefully we'll get the other pilot back, but I think that this was to be expected, and I think that this was something that was presented to him, and that he weighed the risk of this happening and decided that the campaign going on and continuing to go on will do this. Politically, if the Iranians do recover the pilot, how they treat him will be very, very important. The United States has a special animus towards Iran that we don't have, for example, towards, say, Vietnam, where we lost 58,000 soldiers. But now we give them maritime ships, give them for free. With Iran, it's a little different, and I think it's because they have had a state policy, and they're proud of taking hostages. And most Americans really, really dislike that. So if they do capture the pilot and they try to make something of it by mistreating him, I have a feeling that that will rebound against Iran. Right now, most Americans are agnostic about this war, but mistreating a combatant, I think, would be a way to move more people into Trump's camp in the United States.
And according to you, what could be the next strategy for Trump at this point?
I think he's got confidence in his strategy. They basically have a target list. It's adjusted, but it's somewhat monotonous, so it makes for bad TV. And if you get all of your news from social media or TV, Iran is attacking new civilian targets, neutral states, neutral civilian shipping every day. It looks like there's momentum there. The U.S. and Israel are launching 500 to 800 airstrikes every night. So after 2 nights, that's not a story, but it's producing a lot of damage. And, I think they can broaden the target list probably in ways to make more damage. I mean, 2 desalination plants in Kuwait were hit today. Iran gets very little of its water from desalination, but the Gulf states get a lot of their water from desalination. So I think that there's the potential there for some escalation in ways that Iran doesn't necessarily want. And, right now it is remarkable. For example, there have been no attacks on Iranian shipping, even while Iran attacks neutral civilian shipping. Iranian ports remain open. There have been no closures of Iranian ports, which could be done very, very easy. So there's still considerable room for President Trump to turn up the heat if he chooses to.
And well, Colonel, the war has entered the 6th week. Well, and these reports of the jets being downed come by. Washington has shaken up its top military leadership. How do you look at the return of the chief of staff at this stage of point in the war?
Yeah, so I'm very glad you asked me that. A lot of people don't understand how the American system works, but basically since 1986, with the Goldwater-Nichols Act, the chief of staff of the services doesn't command the services in the field. He's not a war commander. He doesn't develop war plans. He does have an opportunity to review them as a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but that's a very cursory review. He is a force provider, and his job is mostly administrative. So he's responsible for developing the force, for selecting and promoting officers, for their training, for their equipment. And then he provides the forces to, in this instance, the Central Command commander, who actually develops the war plans and has operational control of them. So I think this is related to administrative things within Washington. And I think the big issue is, I believe that the Chief of Staff of the Army, Randy George, is very, very closely aligned with Lloyd Austin, who was the Secretary of Defense in the Biden years, who President Trump and Secretary Hedgeseth detest. Major Austin was Cadet Randy George's tactical officer at West Point back in 1987. So there's a long relation, and they served together for many years. Randy George was Lloyd Austin's chief of staff when Lloyd Austin was the Central Command commander. So there's a lot going back there, and I think that this has more to do with what Secretary Hedgeseth sees as purging things that he associates with the Biden issues, which in Secretary Hedgeseth's view is an emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion, social issues at the expense of military efficacy. And I think that General George, who does have the best interests of the Army at heart, probably also was just, as a Biden holdover, he was vulnerable. And when Secretary Hedgeseth put his former military assistant in as the vice chief of staff, I think General George's days were numbered.
So when you said that General George was responsible or would also play a role when it comes to training these soldiers, so at this point in time, when a lot of these soldiers, there's a loss of, of course, we're going to have to wait and see if the second soldier is, of course, revived. But at this point where he's also responsible for training, what does it show at this point in time in the middle of the war, where, of course, there is a risk of losing on these soldiers in this war?
Yeah, so first off, the person that's missing belongs to the Air Force. not the Army. But the training is referring to like individual proficiency and unit training to ensure that units up to the division level are trained to a standard that the Army has established, and that the Joint Chiefs of Staff verifies. They set standards for the Joint Force, and the individual services make sure that they're rated to that. But things like the execution of war plans and the conduct of military operations overseas in combat belong to the combatant commander. So if you change the chief of staff, it takes years for that to have an effect on training and even on personnel and administration. It's just not something that one chief of staff changes overnight.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast, Colonel, for sharing all of those insights. That was Professor Colonel David B. Roches, professor at the Thayer Marshall Institute and former Deputy Director for Peacekeeping in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.